Imagine these huge, complex railway systems we have today. You know, this whole web of high-speed travel, all run by really intricate electronic controls.
Yeah, and for those of us actually designing them or even just relying on them daily, well, we tend to take the safety aspect almost for granted, don't we?
We do. We just assume the signals will work, the barriers will come down, the interlocking systems will prevent, disaster.
But that assumption is built on some really profound, rigorous engineering. And when that engineering fails, well, the consequences can be immediate and absolutely horrific.
We saw that, didn't we, so starkly in 2023, the India-Odisha train accident.
Yeah, a terrible example. A catastrophic signaling system error, a collision, 288 lives lost, and the component right at the heart of it, an electronic interlocking system, the very device designed to be the ultimate safety guardian.
Wow. I mean, that incident just hammers home the non-negotiable importance of functional safety, doesn't it? If these systems, these fail-safe systems, can still lead to such catastrophe, how do we as engineers, as safety people, how do we even quantify that risk? How do we make sure we've done everything humanly possible?
Well, the answer really lies in understanding two core concepts. They're often taught separately, but they absolutely have to work together.
Okay.
There's the quantitative measure, safety integrity level, SIL, as we call it. And then there's the legal and ethical framework, SFARP, so far as reasonably practicable.
Right. SAA and SFAP. Okay, let's unpack this. For you listening, maybe you're an engineering student just getting your head around SIL standards, or maybe you're a seasoned pro navigating some complex project. Our mission today is to do a real deep dive.
Yeah, a practical one, no jargon if we can help it.
Exactly. We want to explore how SIL determines how safe a system needs to be and how SFARP asks the crucial question, is that actually safe enough? And crucially, how these two are connected, how they keep the world's railways running safely.
All right, so SIL, when we talk about CSI, we're basically taking safety out of the realm of just, opinion or gut feeling and moving it firmly into mathematics.
Okay.
It's essentially an internationally recognized grading system. It defines the reliability, the performance required of a specific safety function. It answers that critical question. How likely is this function to fail in a dangerous way?
So it's not just a general safety-approved sticker. It's very specific, it's numerically backed, a guarantee of reliability almost.
Precisely. And it's graded 1 to 4. The higher the SIL level, the exponentially lower the acceptable chance of that dangerous failure happening.
Okay, so let's walk through those levels, because I imagine the application really depends on what could go wrong.
Absolutely. It's all about the potential consequence. So we start at SIL 1.
The entry level.
Exactly. This is for safety functions where the risk is, let's say, moderate. If it fails, it might be inconvenient, maybe cause some minor damage, but it's unlikely to directly lead to serious injury or death.
What kind of systems are we talking about here?
Think primarily informational things. Like the CCTV cameras on a train, or maybe basic speed indicators that just display the speed. They inform, they record, but they don't physically intervene if the driver makes a mistake.
Right, makes sense. Moving up then to SIL 2. This demands moderate reliability.
Yes, a step up. Here, systems start to actively manage risk, although maybe the ultimate failsafe relies on something else.
Right, examples.
Well, you might see certain types of automatic train operation, ATO, particularly on less complex lines, rated at SIL 2. Or thinking about major projects, the Doha Metro specified SIL 2 for its fire safety controls in the tunnels and stations. The Building Automation and Control System, the BACS.
Interesting. So vital, but maybe a failure isn't quite as immediate a catastrophe as a signal failure?
Exactly. The failure mode is generally less immediate, less direct in causing a collision, for instance.
Okay. Then we hit the really critical zone with SI3.
Yeah, SL3 is a significant jump in requirements, very stringent, because the risks are high and the tolerance for any kind of error is very, very low.
Where would we typically see SIL3 applied?
Often in more controlled, lower speed environments, but where consequences are still severe. Think about depot signaling systems maybe, where people are working trackside, or complex shunting yards. The potential impact area is confined, but the potential harm is still high.
Got it. And then the absolute peak, SL4.
This is the top tier, the Everest, as you said, of functional safety. SIL 4 is reserved for those safety-critical systems where a failure could directly, immediately cause multiple fatalities, catastrophic damage.
And the examples are the ones we instinctively think of.
Absolutely. Mainline signaling systems, automatic train protection, ATP systems, the ones that automatically brake the train, and of course those electronic interlocking systems, like the one implicated in the Odisha accident, that manage all train movements and prevent conflicting routes.
And the numbers behind SIL-4 are just staggering. We're talking a probability of dangerous failure less than 10 to the minus 9 per hour.
10 to 9 per hour, yeah. Or sometimes you see 10 on it. It's in that range. Think about what that means.
It's almost impossible to grasp.
It means the system is designed, theoretically, to have less than one dangerous failure occur in over 100,000 years of continuous operation.
Wow.
When you're engineering to that standard, you're not just aiming for reliable. You are literally engineering against the worst imaginable outcome. Existential risk for that function.
The building codes analogy really helps put that in perspective, I think.
How so?
Well, if a minor component failure causes a delay, that's one thing. Annoying, but manageable. But if your mainline interlocking fails, that could be a head-on collision.
Right.
So you can't design it like a standard residential house. You need the earthquake proofing, the robustness of a nuclear power plant, metaphorically speaking. The consequence absolutely dictates the required integrity.
Perfectly put. The potential harm dictates the level of protection needed.
Okay, so SIL gives us that numerical target driven by the potential consequence, but you mentioned another key piece, SFARP.
Yes. SIL provides the how reliable, but it's framed and enforced by this crucial, more qualitative concept, SARP, so far as is reasonably practicable.
Right. SSARP sounds less about numbers and more about responsibility.
It is, fundamentally. It's a principle that originally came out of UK health and safety law, but has pretty much been adopted globally in various forms. You mentioned Dubai earlier. The RTA uses the term ALRP, as low as reasonably practicable.
But they mean essentially the same thing.
Functionally, yes. They both represent this legal and ethical imperative. It requires that risks must be eliminated entirely, or if that's impossible, minimized to the point where taking further steps is grossly disproportionate to the safety benefit you'd gain.
Okay, grossly disproportionate. That sounds subjective. Who decides what's grossly disproportionate? That seems like a potential loophole.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's where engineering judgment meets legal scrutiny. It's called the grossly disproportionate test.
Right.
Now, it's not entirely subjective. For serious risks, like those involving multiple fatalities, guidance often suggests a very high bar. Maybe the cost of the next safety measure has to be, say, 10 times or more the value of the safety benefit gained before you can justify not doing it.
10 times. Wow.
Yeah. So if the cost is just a bit high or inconvenient or cuts into profits, tough. You still have to do it under SFO. Only when the cost becomes truly outrageously excessive compared to the tiny safety gain can you potentially stop.
So a company can't just say, oh, we're over budget, we can't afford that safer widget.
Absolutely not. That's a critical point. SFAP is judged against an objective standard.
Meaning?
Meaning it's based on current professional standards, what the industry generally accepts as good practice, and importantly, what technology is actually available out there in the market. A specific company's financial situation. That's not an excuse.
So if a known better safety control exists and is reasonably practicable for the industry, they have to implement it.
Yes. If they genuinely can't afford the measures needed to operate safely according to industry standards, the principle basically says they shouldn't be undertaking that activity at all.
Let's make that concrete. Say we have an old level crossing. Manual barrier, operated by a person, hasn't had an accident in 20 years.
Okay.
But now there are proven automatic sensor systems, barriers, the whole works. Let's say installing them costs $1 million. Given the risk of even one fatality at that crossing is $1 million grossly disproportionate.
Almost certainly not. Because that automatic system technology is mature, it's available, it's proven to reduce risk, and the consequence of failure, a fatality, is catastrophic. SFPP would likely compel that upgrade.
Even with a good safety record?
Yes, because the potential for catastrophic failure still exists, and a reasonably practicable means of reducing that potential further is now available. SFE forces you to keep up with technology and best practice. What was acceptable 20 years ago might not be acceptable today because the definition of reasonably practicable evolves.
That dynamic aspect is key then. Continuous evaluation.
That's the real power of SFIP. It's not a one-time check.
Okay, this brings us to something you mentioned trips people up, even experienced pros. Meeting your SIL target, say, is I3, doesn't automatically mean you've met your SIRP obligation.
Exactly. This is such a common misconception.
I can see why, though. An engineer does a thorough hazard analysis, calculates SIL3 is needed, designs a great SIL3 system, gets it verified. Surely they're done. They hit the target.
They've hit the minimum required target based on the consequence assessment. SIL analysis sets the floor, the minimum acceptable integrity level. SIIP, however, demands you look beyond that minimum. It mandates continuous improvement.
So hitting SIL3 is necessary, but maybe not sufficient.
Precisely. The engineer or the project team has to step back and perform what we might call the SFARP mandate review.
Okay, what does that involve? What questions do they need to ask?
They need to ask some potentially uncomfortable questions, like, are higher SIL components readily available now? Maybe the initial design used tech from 5 years ago. But today, maybe there's a new generation of point machine or a processor that offers SIL4 capability quite easily.
So you have to look at the current market, not just your original spec from ages ago.
Yes. And then comes the proportionality test again. Let's say upgrading that component from SIL3 to SIL4 only adds, 15% to the cost of that specific component.
Okay.
Is a 15% cost increase grossly disproportionate to the significant added safety margin you get moving from SIL3 to SIL4?
Yeah.
Almost certainly not.
So SFIRP would basically say, even though SIL3 was technically sufficient based on the hazard, you must use the SIL4 component because it's readily available and the cost isn't excessively prohibitive.
Exactly. SFARP forces you to adopt the better, safer solution if it's reasonably practical to do so. It acts like a continuous check on technological advancement and market availability.
So it's not enough just to be safe enough, according to the initial calculation. You have to be as safe as is reasonably achievable with current means.
That's the ethical heart of it. Driving continuous risk reduction. If the cost of doing better doesn't hit that grossly disproportionate threshold, you're obligated to do better. Meeting the minimum SIL is compliance. Achieving SE-shape RP is an ongoing legal, technical, and ethical duty.
Right. So we have SFARP as the overarching principle, SI as the graded score. How do we actually link the risk assessment to that specific SIL number? We need some kind of bridge, presumably mathematical.
We do, and that bridge is the tolerable hazard rate, or THR.
Tolerable hazard rate, okay.
THR is the crucial link. It's defined as the maximum acceptable frequency for a specific hazard to occur in a given situation. It's usually expressed in failures per hour.
Failures per hour. So it takes the qualitative risk assessment, this could be catastrophic, and puts a hard number on how often we can tolerate that catastrophe potentially happening.
Essentially, yes. It translates the outcome of the risk assessment into the quantitative input needed to then go and choose the right SIL level.
So how do they derive this THR number? It sounds incredibly important and probably quite complex.
It is a very systematic process, absolutely central to the whole safety case development. It usually starts at the very top level.
Like for the entire railway network?
Often, yes. You might start with a national or system-wide safety target, something like the maximum acceptable number of passenger fatalities per billion train kilometers, for instance.
Okay, a very high-level target. How does that get down to a specific piece of equipment?
Through a process called apportionment. That top-level tolerable rate for, say, all catastrophic derailments on the network needs to be divided up among all the systems and functions that contribute to preventing derailments.
So the interlocking system doesn't get the entire budget of acceptable failure probability. It has to share.
Exactly. It has to share that tiny probability budget with the train detection system, the track integrity, the power supplies, the signaling logic, maybe even operational procedures. Each critical function gets allocated a small slice of the overall tolerable failure rate.
That makes sense. It forces you to think about the whole system, all the layers of protection.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And this apportionment is where standards often provide guidance or even mandates. For example, the European framework, the Common Safety Method for Risk Evaluation and Assessment CSMRA, effectively sets harmonized targets.
Like what?
Like stating that for equipment where a failure could credibly lead to multiple fatalities. Think interlocking systems. Again, the maximum tolerable hazard rate allocated to that function should be 10 to 9 failures per hour.
Okay, so the standard itself points towards that incredibly low number for the most critical functions.
Yes, and that 10 to 9 per hour THR figure, that's a direct mathematical justification for requiring a sessile for design.
Yeah.
The derived number dictates the integrity level.
So once you've done the complex job of apportioning the overall THR down to a specific safety function, say preventing signal passed at danger for a specific signal.
You then do the final step,
Yeah.
translation. You take that calculated apportioned THR for your function, maybe it came out as, say, $5 times 10 per hour.
Yeah.
You look that up on the standard cell table defined in IEC 61508 or the SIL standards.
And the table tells you.
The table will say that a THR in that range requires a system designed to meet or exceed SL3. The entire safety argument, the safety case document, is built around demonstrating traceability from the initial hazard through the THR calculation and apportionment to the final SIL allocation and proving the system meets it.
Okay, so SL, THR, SFARP. These concepts aren't just floating around abstractly, they're embedded in a pretty dense architecture of international standards, right? Starts with IEC 61508.
That's right. IEC 61508 is sort of the parent standard, the foundational document for functional safety across many industries, not just rail, automotive, process control, medical devices. It established the basic principles, the life cycle, and the concept of SIL for electrical, electronic, and programmable electronic systems, what we often call EPE systems.
But railways are pretty unique. High speeds, complex interactions, specific hazards, so we needed more specific standards.
Exactly. That's where the SIL standards come in, specifically for railway applications. They take the principles of 61508 and tailor them to the rail environment. It can seem like alphabet soup with all the numbers.
Yeah, EN 50126, 50128, 50129. Let's maybe clarify what each one focuses on.
Good idea. Think of it as a structured approach.
Okay, first up, EN 50126.
This one is all about the overall process and life cycle. It defines the systematic approach for managing risk throughout the entire life of a railway system, from the initial concept right through design, installation, operation, maintenance, and even eventual decommissioning. It covers reliability, availability, maintainability, and safety ramps.
So it's the how-to guide for managing safety across the whole timeline.
Pretty much, yeah. It sets the framework for how you identify hazards, assess risks, and manage them consistently.
Okay. Next, maybe the most talked about one, EN 50128, dealing with software, although I hear that's been updated.
Yes, EN 50128 has largely been superseded or integrated into EN 50716 now, but the principle remains. This standard is absolutely critical because so many modern safety systems, interlocking, ATP, train control, are heavily software-driven.
Billions of lines of code.
Exactly. So this standard dictates the extremely rigorous methods needed to verify and validate that software. How do you prove the code does what it's supposed to do, and only what it's supposed to do, to the required SIL level? It prescribes specific techniques, things like formal methods, diverse programming approaches, depending on the target SIL. Getting the software right is arguably the biggest challenge.
I can imagine. And finally, EN 50129. This sounds like the sign-off standard.
In a way, yes. EN 50129 deals with the safety-related electronic systems for signaling the hardware, the system architecture, and critically, the conditions for safety acceptance. It's the standard that formally introduces and governs the structure and content of the safety case.
Ah, the safety case. That's the big document, right? The proof.
That's the one. It's the comprehensive collection of evidence analyses, test results, justifications, procedures that demonstrates, beyond reasonable doubt, that the entire system, hardware, software, environment, operations, maintenance, meets its safety requirements, including the allocated SIL, and is therefore safe to put into service. EN 50129 defines what that proof needs to look like. Hashtag 3.2 regional implementation case studies.
Okay, so we have the standards. Seeing how they're actually applied in big, real-world projects probably helps bring it all to life.
Definitely. Take Europe, for example. They use the CSMRA, the Common Safety Method for Risk Evaluation and Assessment we mentioned earlier.
Right.
The power of CSMRA is that it's legally mandated across the EU for all significant changes to the railway system, whether that's new technology or even a major organizational change. It standardizes the risk assessment process, embeds those THR targets like the $10 for SIL or risks, and often mandates independent safety assessment for critical changes.
And because it's common across countries.
It facilitates cross-acceptance. If a system's safety case is approved according to CSMRA in, say, Germany, it makes it much easier for it to be accepted in France or Spain, which is huge for interoperability and large cross-border projects like ERTMS deployment.
Makes sense. What about the Middle East? We hear a lot about major metro projects there applying these standards very rigorously.
Yes, particularly on new build greenfield projects, they often set a very high bar. The Dubai Metro operated under the RTA's regulatory framework is a prime example.
How so?
Their rules explicitly require risks to be managed down to a LARP, their equivalent of SFARP. They mandate the use of independent safety assessors right from the start, and the safety cases submitted have to show clear, detailed adherence to the SIL standards. It sets a benchmark.
And you mentioned the Doha Metro earlier, too, particularly their fire safety system achieving SIL 2. That sounds like a success story.
It really is. It's a fully driverless system, GUA4, running in a dense city. The level of assurance needed was immense.
And the SL2 for the building automation, the BACS.
Yeah, achieving SIL 2 for a complex, distributed system like the station and tunnel fire safety controls was a major undertaking. It involved not just the system suppliers, but also the independent safety assessor being involved throughout, and crucially, getting buy-in and approval from local bodies like the Qatar Civil Defense.
And the result?
The result of that systematic, SIL-based approach, verified independently, is that the BACS system has apparently maintained 100% operational availability since the Metro opened back in 2019, which is phenomenal. It shows that designing for safety often directly contributes to reliability and availability, too.
That's a great point. Safety isn't just a cost, it enables performance. And what about Australia?
Australia's interesting because their Rail Safety National Law, or SNL, which is overseen by the Office of the National Rail Safety Regulator, on NRSR, explicitly incorporates SFARP into the primary legislation.
So it's right there in the law.
Yes, and the RSNL, along with NRSR's guidance, really emphasizes that SFP requires continuous review, monitoring, and proactive improvement. It also strongly reinforces the objective standard idea that what is reasonably practical is determined by industry capability, not just the finances of one particular operator.
So similar principles, but maybe with a particularly strong legal backing in the national law itself.
That's a fair summary. The core ideas, SIL, THR-based targets, SFARP, LARP, independent assessment, are becoming globally recognized best practice, even if the specific regulatory packaging varies a bit.
Okay, let's get into the real mechanics now. We've got the concepts, the standards. How does an actual engineering team go from identifying a potential hazard to having a certified SIS-rated system? This feels like where the real detailed work happens.
It absolutely is. This is the systematic, step-by-step process that's really at the heart of the EN 50126 safety lifecycle.
Okay, lay it out for us. Step 1, hazard identification.
Right. You can't manage a risk if you don't know it exists.
Yeah.
So the first step is comprehensive identification.
Yeah.
And you can't just rely on one method.
Why not?
Because different methods catch different things. You might use a preliminary hazard analysis, PHA, early on for a broad overview. Then maybe a hazard and operability study, HA's COP, to look at deviations from design intent. And definitely something like a failure mode and effects analysis, FMEA, which looks bottom up. What happens if this specific component fails?
Like a doctor using multiple diagnostic tests for a full picture.
Exactly. You need multiple perspectives, top-down, bottom-up, operational, to be confident you haven't missed a critical hazard hiding somewhere.
Okay, hazards identified. Step 2, consequence analysis.
Now you assess the potential severity if that hazard actually occurs. You classify it, typically using standard categories. Is the worst credible outcome catastrophic? Maybe multiple fatalities. Critical, perhaps single fatality or severe injuries.
Marginal,
Yeah.
minor injuries or significant damage, or just negligible.
And that classification is key for what comes next.
Directly. It feeds straight into step 3. Establish the tolerable hazard rate, THR.
Where we put that number on acceptable frequency.
Yes. Based on those top-level safety targets we discussed, and informed by the consequence severity just determined, you calculate the maximum rate at which this specific hazard is allowed to occur. For catastrophic consequences, that THR is going to be extremely low, down in that 10 nanoper-hour range.
Got it. Then step 4, apportion the THR, dividing the budget. This is where it gets mathematically intricate. That overall THR for the hazard, e.g. preventing derailment at a switch, has to be distributed among all the independent safety functions or barriers that contribute to preventing it.
So the switch locking mechanism, the position detection, the signaling logic that prevents movement over an unlocked switch.
Exactly. Each gets assigned a portion of the THR budget. You often use techniques like reliability block diagrams or fault trees here to figure out how the probabilities combine and how to allocate them appropriately so the total system risk stays below the overall THR. It's often iterative.
Complex stuff. Okay, assuming that's done. Step 5, translate to SIL.
This is relatively straightforward in theory. You take the final apportioned THR target calculated for your specific safety function, and you look it up on the standard SIL table.
And that tells you if you need SIL 1, 2, 3, or 4.
Precisely. Gives the engineering team their minimum design integrity target.
But just assigning it isn't enough. Step 6, verify allocation. You have to prove the design actually meets it.
Absolutely critical. This is where the quantitative proof comes in. The design team has to use formal analytical methods to demonstrate that their proposed system architecture actually achieves the required safety integrity.
What kind of methods?
Commonly fault tree analysis, FTA, that works backward from the undesired event, like the interlocking failing dangerously, and calculates the probability based on the failure rates of all the contributing components and their logical combination. Or sometimes event tree analysis, ETA, which works forward from an initiating event. The goal is to show mathematically that the calculated probability of dangerous failure for the design system is lower than the THR allocated in Step 4.
Right, the proof. And finally, Step 7, document and review.
Every hazard identified, every assumption made in the consequence analysis, every THR calculation and apportionment, all the verification results from FTA or testing at all has to be meticulously documented. This forms the core evidence in the hazard log and ultimately feeds into the safety case.
And that documentation has to be crystal clear, traceable.
And ready for intense scrutiny by managers, regulators, and especially the independent safety assessor. Traceability is key. You need to be able to show the golden thread from hazard identification right through to the final verified SI rating. Hashtag 4.2, the common mistakes made by professionals.
Okay, that 7-step process sounds robust, very thorough. But we know things still go wrong sometimes. Where do professionals, even experienced ones, tend to make mistakes when they're applying SIL and SARP in the real world?
Oh, there are definitely recurring pitfalls. Probably the most common one, mistake 1, treating SIL as a component property.
I think I see where this is going. Buying a sensor that says SIL 3 certified on the box.
And assuming your whole safety loop is now SIL 3, wrong. SIL is a property of the entire safety function, end to end. That includes the sensor, yes, but also the wiring, the logic solver, the PLC or computer, the output device like an actuator or relay, the power supply, the software running on it, how it's installed, and how it's maintained.
So if any single part of that chain is only SIL 1, like maybe the
Right.
power supply,
Then the maximum SIL rating your entire function can claim is SIL 1, no matter how good that SIL 3 sensor is. It's like putting a Formula 1 engine in a regular road car. It doesn't make the whole car F1 rated. You need the F1 brakes, suspension, chassis, everything. SI is about the complete package.
That's a great analogy. Okay, what's another common one?
Mistake 2, ignoring or underestimating human factors.
How does that play into SIL?
Well, many safety functions ultimately rely on a human to take action, even if it's just responding to an alarm or following a maintenance procedure correctly. If your safety function requires a person to intervene, the overall reliability of that function is inherently limited by the probability of human error.
Right. Humans aren't SIL4 reliable, especially under pressure.
Exactly. You might have a fantastically designed SL4 alarm system, but if the required response is for an operator in a control room to notice it, interpret it correctly, and take the right action within, say, 30 seconds during a stressful situation, well, the overall risk reduction achieved might only be equivalent to SIL1 or SESL2 effectiveness because the human element introduces significant failure probability. You have to account for that human reliability aspect.
Makes sense. Okay, mistake 3.
This is the one we keep coming back to. Mistake 3, confusing meeting the minimum SIL with achieving SIRP.
Just because the calculation said SIL2 doesn't mean you stop there.
Precisely. Hitting the minimum required SIL derived from the THR is just, well, the minimum. It's ticking the box for basic compliance. SFARP demands more. It demands that continuous check. Is there a readily available SIL3 solution on the market? Is the cost premium for it grossly disproportionate? If not, SFARP compels you to use the better SIL3 option. Engineers sometimes forget to look beyond their initial calculation and assess the broader market and the SIRP application.
Right, need to keep that ethical and legal hat on, not just the technical one. What about technical design flaws?
A huge one there is mistake 4, overlooking common cause failures. CCF.
Common cause failures. Explain that.
Okay, so to achieve high SI levels, especially SI3 and CCF, you almost always need redundancy. Two or more channels that can perform the safety function, so if one fails, the other takes over.
Makes sense. Backup systems.
Yes, but redundancy only works if the failures are independent. A common cause failure is a single event or condition that can cause all your redundant channels to fail simultaneously, wiping out your redundancy benefit.
What kind of things cause CCFs?
All sorts. A hidden bug in the software used on both redundant processors. A power surge that damages both channels because they share a power supply or are physically close. Extreme environmental conditions like flooding or heat affecting both systems. Even a mistake in maintenance procedures applied identically to both channels.
So just having two identical systems side by side isn't enough for true high integrity?
Not for SIL 3 or 4, no. The standards, like EN 50129, push hard for diversity to combat CCFs. Using different hardware, maybe from different manufacturers, different software coded by separate teams, possibly using different algorithms or languages, physical separation, independent power supplies. You have to actively design defenses against things that could take out both your main system and its backup at the same time. Ignoring CCF potential is a classic way to overestimate your system's real safety integrity.
That's crucial. Okay, one more big mistake.
Mistake 5, neglecting the entire safety lifecycle, focusing only on the design and commissioning phase.
Thinking the job's done once the system is installed and working.
Exactly. But a system that was perfectly designed and verified to SIL 4 on day one can easily degrade over time if it's not properly managed throughout its operational life.
That's
Poor configuration management, someone makes an unauthorized change. Using non-certified spare parts during maintenance because they're cheaper. Failing to apply critical software patches. Not managing component obsolescence so parts become unavailable or unreliable. All these operational and maintenance phase activities are critical to maintaining this SIL rating. That $10 failure rate relies on adhering to the specified procedures for maybe 30 or 40 years. If you let standards slip in maintenance or operation, that SIL 4 system might effectively be operating at a SIL 1 or worse, without anyone realizing until it's too late. Safety integrity has to be managed cradle to grave.
Okay, given all these complex steps, all these potential pitfalls, it seems essential to have someone checking the work, doesn't it? Someone independent.
Absolutely essential. And that's precisely the role of the Independent Safety Assessor, or ISA.
The ISA, they're like the safety auditors for the project.
You could think of it that way. But it's more than just auditing. The ISA's role is defined in the standards as providing independent judgment and assurance that the safety requirements set for the system are appropriate and complete, and critically, that the system actually meets those requirements in practice. They are the objective third-party check.
And the key word there seems to be independent.
Critically important. The standards are very clear on this. The ISA organization must be independent from the project team doing the design, development, and implementation.
How is that independence ensured?
Several ways. Organizationally, they shouldn't report to the same managers as the project delivery team. Financially, their payment shouldn't be linked to project milestones like finishing on time or under budget, which could create conflicts of interest. And personally, the individuals doing the assessment must be free from undue pressure and have the competence and authority to make judgments impartially.
And they need the right expertise too, presumably.
Definitely. They need demonstrable competence, often through formal accreditation, and crucially, deep domain knowledge of railways and the specific type of system they're assessing. You can't have someone who only understands process safety assessing a complex railway interlocking system.
So when does the ISA get involved in a project? Right at the end to check the paperwork?
Ideally, no. They should be involved much earlier. Best practice is to engage the ISA right from the concept phase or very early in the design.
Why so early?
So they can review and provide input on the initial hazard analysis, the risk assessment, the THR derivation, and the proposed SIL allocations before detailed design starts. It's much easier and cheaper to correct fundamental misunderstandings or inappropriate targets early on.
Makes sense. And then throughout the project?
Yes, they conduct ongoing assessments. They'll perform audits of the design processes. They might witness critical tests, like software validation or system integration testing, and they meticulously review the evolving safety case documentation at key project milestones. Their involvement culminates in providing a final safety assessment report, which is usually required before the railway regulator will grant permission to put the system into operational service.
You mentioned the Doha Metro again, that massive, fully driverless system. And ISA must have been absolutely critical there.
Immense. Ricardo, for example, acted as the ISA for significant parts of that project, starting way back in 2012. On a project of that scale and complexity, with multiple international suppliers delivering different safety-critical systems, signaling, rolling stock, platform screen doors, control centers, having a single, competent ISA overseeing the whole thing is vital.
What's their role in that kind of mega project?
They ensure that all the different suppliers are correctly interpreting and applying the select standards, that the safety requirements are consistent across the board, and critically, that the interfaces between these complex systems are properly defined and managed safely. They provide that continuous objective oversight throughout the entire project lifecycle, building confidence that the final integrated system is safe enough for fully autonomous operation. Hashtag 5.2 phone time, learning from catastrophic failures.
The whole point of SIL, SFAP, ISAs, it's all ultimately about preventing those catastrophic failures. But sadly, they still happen sometimes. When they do, it's often because one of these fundamental principles was missed or violated. Looking back at some incidents, what are the key lessons?
Well, let's go back to the tragic India-Odisha train accident in 2023. The initial findings pointed towards issues with the electronic interlocking system, specifically a failure related to maintenance work, where a wiring error effectively bypassed safety logic, creating a single point of failure.
So even within a system likely designed to a high SIL level.
Exactly. The sheer scale of the tragedy underscores why interlocking systems demand SIVOR integrity. But the specific failure mechanism highlights a breakdown potentially in the later stages of our process verification, installation, commissioning, and maintenance procedures. Steps 6 and 7. Rigorous testing, independent verification after maintenance, and strict configuration control should, in theory, catch such wiring errors.
So it's a reminder that the design integrity means nothing if the installation or maintenance introduces a flaw.
Precisely. And SFARP demands you think about reasonably practicable measures to prevent those kinds of systematic errors during installation and maintenance, not just random hardware failures. Are the procedures clear enough? Is the testing following maintenance adequate? Is there independent checking?
Okay, let's shift to a different kind of failure. The UK Wallen derailment in 2020. That wasn't about complex electronics failing, was it?
No, that was tragically different. 2 fatalities occurred when a train entered a section of track under a temporary speed restriction much too fast. This happened following a signaling failure where manual working procedures were in place.
So a failure during degraded operations.
Yes. And the investigation highlighted significant organizational and human factors. There was evidence suggesting pressure to maintain schedule, inadequate planning for the degraded working, and communication failures led to the driver not being properly aware of or not adhering to the temporary speed restriction.
That sounds like a classic SFIP issue, but at the organizational level.
Absolutely textbook. The pressure for punctuality, the commercial priority, appears to have overridden the rigorous safety procedures required for managing that temporary high-risk situation of degraded working. SFARP demands that safety procedures must be paramount, especially during abnormal conditions. Sacrificing safety procedures for operational convenience or punctuality is only permissible if the cost of adherence is grossly disproportionate to the safety benefit.
Which it clearly wasn't here. The benefit was preventing derailment.
Exactly. The safety benefit was effectively infinite, and the cost was just some delay. It highlighted how organizational culture and management decisions are just as critical to safety as the technical SIL rating of the equipment. SFARP applies to the whole socio-technical system.
Right. One more, the Hong Kong MTR signaling incident in 2019, a collision during testing of a new signaling system.
Yes, a low-speed collision between 2 trains during the non-operational testing phase of a new communications-based train control CBTC system.
What went wrong there?
It was traced back to a software issue. Under a specific complex failure scenario simulated during the test, a programming error related to how redundant zone controllers handled data led to incorrect position information and a failure of the collision avoidance logic.
So even with presumably a very high SIL target for the software.
Yes. Even with advanced CBTC technology aiming for high integrity, this incident stressed the incredible difficulty and importance of comprehensive software verification and validation, the focus of EN 501285071. You have to test not just normal operation, but all credible failure modes, including failures of the safety system itself. It showed that even that tiny theoretical probability of a software flaw, that 0.1% chance perhaps, can manifest in complex systems. It requires absolute rigor in simulation, code review, and testing before you let it anywhere near live operations.
Looking ahead, the railway industry isn't standing still. We're seeing rapid digitalization, automation. These must be throwing up new challenges for these established SIL and SFARP frameworks.
They absolutely are. The frameworks are robust, but they're being tested by new technologies and threats.
Like what? What's the biggest challenge?
One huge area is cybersecurity integration. Traditional functional safety standards, like the ones we've discussed, were primarily written to deal with random hardware failures or systematic errors internal to the system design flaws, software bugs.
They weren't really thinking about malicious external attacks.
Not explicitly in the same way. They weren't designed for threats like hackers trying to penetrate the system, ransomware locking up control centers, or deliberate data manipulation attacks aiming to spoof the system into making unsafe decisions.
So a system could be perfectly SIL4 compliant in terms of its internal failure modes, but still vulnerable.
Potentially, yes. If its communication links or maintenance interfaces aren't properly secured, an external attacker could theoretically command the safety function to fail, bypassing all the internal redundancy and integrity measures.
So functional safety and cybersecurity can no longer be treated as separate disciplines.
They have to be integrated. You can't really claim a system meets a high SIL level today unless you've also assessed and mitigated the reasonably foreseeable cybersecurity threats that could compromise its safety function. The SAISI boundary now includes the cyber domain. Standards are evolving to address this, but it's a major ongoing challenge.
Okay, what else is pushing the boundaries?
AI and machine learning. This is a really tricky one for the deterministic world of SI.
How so?
We're increasingly looking at using AI or ML for complex tasks, things like predictive maintenance based on analyzing sensor data, or even real-time obstacle detection using complex computer vision. These systems often aren't based on fixed predictable algorithms like traditional signaling logic. They learn, they adapt, their behavior can evolve over time.
And SI relies on being able to predict and quantify failure rates very precisely, like that $10 number.
Exactly. How do you calculate a constant, verifiable failure rate for an algorithm that's constantly changing its internal state as it learns from new data? How do you provide assurance, demonstrate SIRP, when the system's safety characteristics might be non-deterministic or emergent?
That sounds like a fundamental challenge to the current SIL paradigm.
It is. It doesn't mean we can't use AI, but it probably means we need new methods for verification and validation, maybe accepting limitations on the SIL levels we can confidently claim for certain types of AI applications until those methods mature. We need ways to ensure predictability and safety even when the system is learning.
Right. And finally, the big one, autonomous operations, GOI4, fully driverless trains.
Yes, the ultimate goal for many metro systems, and maybe eventually mainline. Removing the driver completely places the entire burden of safety onto the technology.
So everything needs to be high SIL?
Essentially, yes. Every sensor detecting obstacles, every communication link relaying commands, every algorithm making decisions about acceleration and braking, they all likely need to meet very high integrity levels, probably SIL4 for critical functions.
Sure.
But it's more than just the SIL of individual components. The complexity of the system integration becomes enormous. And critically, the strategies for handling degraded modes become paramount. What happens when a sensor fails or communication is lost? The system has to be able to detect the failure, enter a safe state, like slowing down or stopping, and potentially recover, all without any human intervention on board. Designing and improving these complex fail-safe behaviors for every conceivable scenario is a massive engineering challenge for GOA4. Hashtag tag 6.2 practical advice for early career professionals.
This is clearly a complex and demanding field for our listeners who are maybe just starting their careers in railway engineering or safety, grappling with all this. What practical advice would you give them for navigating SIL and SAR effectively?
That's a great question. I think the first thing is understand the why. Don't just blindly follow a procedure or fill in a checklist because the standard says so.
Go beyond the process.
Yes. Try to really understand the underlying hazard scenario you're trying to prevent. Why is this specific control measure important? How does it contribute to reducing risk? How does it help demonstrate SIFP? If you only understand the procedure but not the underlying risk, you won't know how to react intelligently when something unexpected happens or when the procedure doesn't quite fit the situation. Context is everything.
Good point. What else?
Documentation. Rigorously. I know nobody does paperwork, but in safety engineering, documentation isn't bureaucracy. It's the fundamental evidence of due diligence.
It's the proof you did your job properly.
Exactly. Every decision you make, why you chose a certain SEL level, why you discounted a particular failure mode, your justification for why further risk reduction wasn't reasonably practicable, It all needs to be recorded clearly, logically, and traceably. Years later, if something goes wrong, that documentation is what will be scrutinized to determine if professional duties were met. Good, clear, justifiable documentation is professional practice, full stop.
Okay. Understand the why. Document rigorously. What's next?
This one's maybe less technical, but just as important. Develop ethical courage.
Ethical courage.
Yes. Especially when you're starting out, you might find yourself in situations where there's pressure, maybe subtle, maybe not so subtle, to cut corners on safety, to meet a tight deadline, to save costs, to skip a test that seems inconvenient.
Right. The commercial pressures.
Exactly. You need to remember your professional and ethical obligations. Safety is paramount in this industry. Have the courage to raise concerns, to ask questions, to insist that the SFA principle is followed, even if it makes you unpopular in the short term. Speaking up when something doesn't feel right is often the last line of defense against potential disaster.
That's powerful advice. Stand your ground for safety. Anything else?
Finally, embrace continuous learning. The technology changes, the standards evolve, and sadly, incidents still happen. Make it a habit to read incident reports not just from your own company or country, but globally.
Like the ones we discussed.
Yes. Try to understand not just what failed, but why the safety defenses didn't work. What were the underlying causes? Were there organizational factors? Were there weaknesses in the procedures? Were there early warning signs that were missed? Learning from the failures of others is one of the most effective ways to improve your own practice and prevent similar events in the future. Hashtag tag outro. So if we boil down this whole deep dive, SIL safety integrity level gives us that quantified risk-based target for how reliable the safety function needs to be, graded from 1 to 4, based directly on the potential severity of failure.
Right. It tells you the minimum integrity required. But then SFARP, so far as is reasonably practicable, adds that crucial overlay. It's the legal and ethical driver that forces continuous improvement. It demands you implement the safest solution that's technologically available and not grossly disproportionate in cost.
Exactly. They're not alternatives. They're complementary. SIL sets the target. SFIP pushes you to exceed it if reasonably practicable. You need both working together.
And this rigorous combined approach works. You mentioned the statistics earlier. European railway safety has demonstrably improved under these kinds of frameworks.
It has. That 32.4% reduction in passenger fatalities across the EU between 2010 and 2023 isn't accidental. It's the result of systematic application of these safety principles day in, day out across the industry. These frameworks genuinely save lives.
So here's a final thought for you, our listeners, to take away and maybe explore further. Thinking about those future challenges, AI, autonomy, cybersecurity, the application of these core principles, SIL and SFRP, isn't actually a barrier to innovation, is it?
No, I'd argue it's the opposite.
It's the framework that actually enables the responsible and sustainable adoption of these powerful new technologies. We can only confidently deploy AI or fully autonomous trains if we can assure their safety using principles derived from this rigorous SIL and SFRP foundation.
Absolutely. The next big leaps in railway safety won't come from abandoning these principles, but from finding new and better ways to apply them rigorously to these more complex, interconnected, and intelligent systems.
So the challenge for the industry and for all of you working in it is to keep asking that SFA question. What new safety measure, what better technology, what improved process is reasonably practicable today that maybe wasn't yesterday?
And then having the determination to implement it, that relentless pursuit of the next increment of safety, driven by SFA and measured by SIL, that's the ongoing duty of the railway safety professional. And it's what keeps rail one of the safest ways to travel.
That was our deep dive into SIL and SFA. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for listening to Safe Tracks, the Systems Safety Assurance podcast. Here, we talk all about how safety assurance keeps our railways running safely, smoothly, and reliably every single day. If you're curious about RAM management, RAM analysis, and how reliability is actually calculated, check out the RAMs Ready podcast playlist on this channel. It's packed with great insights. And hey, don't forget to subscribe and tap the notification bell so you'll know the moment a new episode is out. Until next time, stay safe, stay assured.